It's a pleasure to be here. And this is, as far as I know, the second longest running UFO conference in the USA after MUFON. I can't think of any others that have had at least 20 years, 20 consecutive years of just going on here, and maybe even a few before that if you count some of the things we had at Prince George's Community College. And I would like to thank Sue not only for her introduction, but for helping with my PowerPoint presentation, because I think these slides look pretty good, but it's not really due to me. I picked the cases, but she actually puts them in the PowerPoint format, and yeah, you would be surprised at how some of these things clean up. Some of the drawings and everything like that are better than they are in the CMS system once you see them. Now, my talk, what will it be about? It's a little bit of a scatter shot, like it is almost every year. I'll start off with a few things that have been in the news lately, the past, since January, let's say, to almost to today. And then I'll go into some MUFON cases and give you a little bit of an idea, like I do each year, of how many cases MUFON is receiving and how the international situation looks. And then I'll, if I have time, and I probably have somewhat less than an hour now at this point, maybe 50 minutes, I'll get into 10 or 12 cases that I think you'll find kind of interesting. If I get to the last one, that's a sort of a bonus one. And it's not critical that I get to that last case since it happened in 1916, I think, but it's nonetheless quite neat. And if I don't get to it, I can speak with individuals afterwards about it if you want, if someone's really curious and wants to know what it is. Yeah, here we see an iconic UFO sculpture. I think it exists here in Michigan or something like that, or Illinois, in some prairie someplace. I think it is called the Flying Saucer or something like that. To me, it always evokes sort of the sense of awe and mysteriousness and the unknown that UFOs connote. I have to throw a little bit of humor into this situation here. Ufology can be pretty funny at times. If not everybody can read these in the back, I apologize. I tried to keep the verbiage down on the slides, but yeah, there's a certain amount of it is required. Once again, I'm not going to, unfortunately, if you're looking to find answers here, I'm not going to give you any answers as to what the UFO phenomenon is, because I actually do not know. As I've said every year here, Peter's probably tired of hearing this, I think there's something that UFOs are a non-human intelligence. I don't know where they come from. I don't know how they get from wherever they are to here. I don't think it's a prosaic phenomenon, that it's weather phenomena or hoaxes or anything like that. Like I say, a non-human intelligence. That's as far as I can go. That's as far as the evidence at this point leads me to conclude. We've all heard a lot about disclosure in the UFO field now for a number of years. Usually when you hear the word disclosure, it refers to the presumed possession by the United States government of technology that is well beyond any technology that our military or the civilian population of the US is using each year. That is to say, disclosure, we're holding the secrets of anti-gravity. We're holding the secrets of unlimited energy. We're holding, the government that is holding the secrets of getting from our Earth to another star system in mere seconds. And a lot of the people who presume to know this state it with absolute certainty. I do not believe that at all. It could conceivably be that we have that, but if so, the history of this country makes absolutely no sense in the last 50 years if we have anti-gravity and can be any place in the world in a second. We would not have a problem with North Korea or any other hostile powers. But disclosure really is, as my definition talks about here, the action of disclosing or opening up to view some subject or revelation or discovery. Here was an interesting thing. When I give my 1952 talk about what happened over Washington then, on almost the conclusion of this series of sightings on July 29th, 1952, there was a big press conference at the Pentagon held by a person named Major John Samford, who was the Director of Intelligence of the Air Force. During that lengthy press conference that lasted for almost 2 hours or something like that, he said, almost at the opening, however, there have remained a percentage of this total he means massive reports, in the order of 20% of the reports that have come from credible observers of relatively incredible things. Well, that to me is disclosure, and that something is going on in this country and in the world with regard to the UFO phenomenon. Samford said it right then publicly. So disclosure actually occurred 60-some years ago, 66 years ago, 67 years ago. Well, as I'll go ahead here in a little bit, you'll see that these same statements are being made today by government officials, but they merely reflect what they should have known or what someone should have told them had occurred almost 70 years before. What Samford also said at the same press conference was, what we're trying to say as much as we can on that today, the UFO subject, and admit that the barrier of understanding on all of this is not one that we break. I've always thought that's a kind of a pretty deep statement, and that's kind of an interesting thing. We can't actually achieve understanding on what's going on with the UFO subject. Again, it was a type of disclosure. Okay, let's fast forward now to April of this year, April 23rd. This is an excerpt I took from an article that appeared in Politico, online political podcast or online reporting service. The article was, the U.S. Navy is drafting new guidelines for reporting UFOs. This sort of hit everyone with a lot of surprise in the scientific and just basically the global community, not necessarily the UFO community, but everybody else outside this room, let's put it that way. When Brian Bender, who had an interview with a spokesman, a Navy spokesman, who said that there have been a number of reports of unauthorized or unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled ranges and designated airspace in recent years. For safety and security concerns, the Navy and the U.S. Air Force take these reports very seriously and investigate each and every report. So the Navy is updating and formalizing the process by which the reports of these incursions can be brought to the cognizant authorities, that is to say the directorship of the Navy and the people in the military. A new message to the fleet will go out. And what occasioned this sudden breakthrough, this sudden statement? Well, for several years now, the military, especially the Navy, has been having and encountering, their pilots have been encountering very high-performance vehicles, seemingly, in the airspaces in which they're practicing maneuvers or tests or what have you, off the coast, the Pacific coast, and the Atlantic coast of this country. We've all heard from ATIP of the Nimitz affair, which occurred in 2004, I guess it was. Well, there was a subsequent series of events that occurred in 2015 and 2016, which further alarmed the Navy because these were occurring off the coast of the East Coast during large naval exercises. And in one case, there was a near miss between a pilot and one of these objects, and the pilots themselves finally said, something has to be done here. We cannot keep having these military exercises if other aircraft, maybe secret aircraft of the U.S., that are trying to just infiltrate these exercises to see if these highly advanced vehicles can evade cutting-edge technology on our Air Force jets or on the Navy jets. It could be a hostile power, but they said we need more disclosure on this stuff. We need more transparency here before there's going to be a mid-air collision and people get killed. So the Navy got enough pressure that they finally said, okay, we'll refine and change our reporting process so we can give due diligence to these reports. Then in May, just about a month later, after we heard the report of that I just showed you appeared in Politico, the New York Times ran another article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper and another person, basically updating this story. And one of the interesting quotes in that newspaper story is up here on the screen. I've given you an excerpt of it. And they said there were a number of different reports, the military spokesman said. Some cases could have been commercial drones, he said, but in other cases, we don't know who's doing this. We don't have enough data to track this. So the intent of the message to the fleet is to provide updated guidance on reporting procedures for suspected intrusions into our airspace. In more words, this sounds a lot like what General Samford said back at the 1952 press conference. Something is going on, and the Navy's going to get into this and look at it. The type of radar that the Navy jets, the FA-18 Hornets, carried in 2004 was a mechanically scanned array. And it required, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but among other things, it required an antenna to be physically moved on the aircraft to scan the volume of airspace ahead of the airplane. And it was a tremendously advanced system for 2004. It could do an awful lot. It had synthetic aperture radar, and it could pick up signatures of aircraft many, many miles away. Over the intervening years between 2004 and 2015 and 2014, they developed the next generation of these scanned radars, something now called automatic, how do I have it here? I get this right. Active Electronically Scanned Array, EASA, which was a magnitude of order better than the earlier one. For one thing, it didn't require the antenna to be physically moved. It was all done electronically through some scanning. The resolution of objects in airspace ahead of the airplanes was vastly enhanced. The situational awareness, as the military would say, of the pilots was, again, improved greatly. They could simultaneously track a number of targets. It could do it very rapidly. Once the airplane started getting this AESA, suddenly these unknown targets started showing up and started being reported. So it was almost like the radar was now picking up things that the earlier generation of radar couldn't. Now we were seeing things we weren't seeing before, or so the Navy thought. Sometimes the objects could physically be seen by the pilots, but oftentimes they couldn't. They could only detect it on the scanned array radar. And this was extremely concerning to the pilots. And unofficially throughout the naval squadrons, it was well known that the planes were picking up these objects, or suspected objects. And in one case, one was seen. And this article in the New York Times described it as looking like, I think it was a cube inside a transparent sphere, a lit cube inside a transparent sphere. And this arrangement was seen several times. There wasn't just one report of this crazy kind of an object. So basically, we have the military rediscovering what they should have known from 70 years before. If anyone is familiar with UFO history in the 1948 and the early 1950s and some of the reports that occurred then, there were some fantastic cases that occurred of things instantaneously moving, making right-angle turns, vanishing from in front of the aircraft of that day. And the military damn well knew how advanced that technology seemed to be. For proof, let me just go quickly to this document here. I'll have these typed out so I could know what I was talking about a little bit more. This is a top secret document called The Analysis of Flying Object Incidents in the U.S. This was declassified in the mid-1980s, okay? So this document would have been known among all the heads of the various branches of the military at that time. This report was disseminated by both the Air Force and the Navy. The Navy disseminated it under a slightly different title, but it was the contents of it were the same. One of the sentences in here reads, the frequency of reported incidents, the similarity in many of the characteristics attributed to the observed objects, and the quality of observers considered as a whole support the contention that some type of flying object has been observed. Another line, therefore, it appears that some object has been seen. However, the identification of that object cannot be readily accomplished on the basis of information reported on each incident. Like I said, this was classified top secret, but it came out in 1985 or thereabouts. This report appeared as one entire issue of the MUFON UFO Journal. Did the news media or did scientists bang down the doors of MUFON wanting to know more about this report? Did we see front page stories on the New York Times about what was just set forth in this report here, a top secret report essentially saying that something back in 1948 was occurring that the military couldn't explain. Nope, not a word. And that's how it was until, earlier this year. Suddenly their eyes are opened. They're woke. Well, I'm sorry, it's been 70 years that we civilian researchers have been trying to say, hey, something's going on, and let's bring some science to bear on this subject. And we haven't reached that point yet, obviously, since basically there have been a few media people who my hats are off to them, Tucker Carlson being one, on Fox News, who continuously has UFO authorities and spokespeople talking. He's doggedly stayed with that subject. And Leslie Kean and her colleagues on the New York Times who have followed this story as well. But still, the majority of the scientific community, the majority of the intellectual community in this country, and the rest of the news media still give it short shrift and sort of would probably ridicule it if they had the chance. Yeah, after these reports appeared, I started seeing these kind of things on, this is, I think, from a Fox News webpage. This was a headline. This was a headline for the day when I looked at this. Senators briefed on UFOs as speculation grows surrounding the naval sightings. Trump says he was briefed on Navy sightings of UFOs. I mean, frankly, I never thought I would see this day when something like this appeared, at least even on the internet, let alone in newspapers, but just see this as the main story, when you pull up the home page. And similar stories were on CNN and some of the other websites as well. Trump, of course, was very closed-mouthed on it all. He said he didn't think there was anything to it, although he admitted he had been briefed. Okay, let me get into a third thing that occurred this summer, maybe a little bit less well-known. As you know, I used to work at the patent office, and suddenly this website called the War Zone, or it appears also as the Drive. I think the brain behind it is a fellow named Tyler Rogaway. Documents show the Navy got a patent granted because they were warned that the Chinese might beat us to it and had this technology before us. Therefore, we better get this patent, the U.S. better get it before it gets out to somebody else. There's a lot of problems with that statement there. It's true. The Navy have a copy of that thing here. Let's see if the Navy got this patent on December 18th of 2018. And this was right in the area I worked on in the patent office, aeronautics essentially. Here's a copy of the whole patent. I know the examiner on this patent. I've worked with him on many of his own applications. I helped train him when he first came to the patent office. His name is Philip Bonzel. Anyhow, I'm not going to get into a lot on patents here. Basically, this invention came out. It's to a craft using an inertial mass reduction device. Yeah, here you'll see the first page that I'm looking at. Let me summarize what this thing does in a sentence or so. The description of the case here in the patent says, the present invention is directed to a craft using an inertial mass reduction device. It is a feature of the present invention to provide a craft using an inertial mass reduction device that can travel at extreme speeds. It is possible to envision a hybrid aerospace undersea craft which is due to the physical mechanisms enabled with the inertial mass reduction device, and it can function as a submersible craft capable of extreme underwater speeds and enhanced stealth capabilities. Here's the most important part of the patent, the claims. Every patent has claims. What the inventor claims is the patentable novelty of the invention. From what I just read to you there concerning this device, it's more than just cutting edge. If we had a device that could do what this patent says it does, we could reduce the mass of an object to a very small number. It could conceivably then be moved at extreme speeds. Do I understand this whole patent disclosure? Not really. Half of it is involved with very upper end and high-tech physics. It's a very short patent. These claims, that's the claims. There are 4 of them here. They don't claim in the claims an inertial mass reduction device. They just claim basically a craft having an inner resonant cavity wall, an outer resonant cavity wall with a cavity between the 2 walls, microwave emitters such that the microwave emitters create high-frequency electromagnetic waves throughout the resonant cavity between the 2 walls, to create a local polarized vacuum outside the outer resonant cavity wall. The Patent Office initially did not want to allow this application because it said to create a local polarized vacuum. The examiner, Phil Bonzel, gave the very same rejection I would have given, that basically it seems to violate known laws of physics, so the application cannot be allowed. He did not submit the Patent Office did not provide any prior art documents of earlier devices because there weren't any earlier devices to fall back on. Eventually, the Navy, this was a Navy patent, they brought in an expert who said, well, the examiner doesn't really understand high-end physics. He has to go, as we all do in the Patent Office, we work in a range of arts. You can't know everything. And Bonzel held to his rejection. They were going to take it to the Board of Appeals, and the Navy attorneys filed a patent brief to go to the Board of Appeals. It's 20-some pages long. I've gone through it. They basically set forth saying that it was the burden of Bonzel to say where this device presumably violated high-end physics, where it violated the known laws of physics, and Phil had to pull back his rejection. He allowed the case, as I would have done after reading that brief. At one point before the brief was filed, a Navy affidavit was filed by an outside expert the Navy brought in, who looked at the case and basically said, well, this kind of science is known. Its articles have appeared in many refereed journals. Many scientific conferences have discussed polarized vacuums. It certainly is a known concept in physics that doesn't appear to violate any laws. And moreover, maybe the United States better be aware that the Chinese are also developing this device. That line is actually in the affidavit. I have it here with me if anybody wants to see it. The contention of the drive was that the Navy has this tremendous device, and that it's not going to be, that it was allowed because of the fact that the Chinese were going to get it. That's not true. Then Bonzel writes in one of his actions that he did not allow this application, or did the fact that the Chinese might possess this application have anything to do with his decision regarding rejection or allowance of the application. It had nothing to do with the Chinese. Every patent document is a public document. There is no such thing as a classified patent application. As a classified patent, there's a classified application, but not a patent. So if an application is classified secret, it remains classified secret until such time as the secrecy order is withdrawn. It could be 30 years. At the point at which the secrecy order is withdrawn, the application is passed to issue and it becomes a patent, even though everybody that might have worked on the original application is now dead. It's not unusual to see a patent come out that was filed in the 1950s, and something in it was classified. I don't think that if this device worked, and various people are saying that the Navy's playing games here, they're trying to acclimatize us to the fact that great changes are going to be coming in the near future. This is why these patents are coming out. This is why they changed the reporting process. And my opinion is, from what I have seen in the patent office, and I've worked on cases a little bit like this, that if this device were really capable of doing the things that this claim and the disclosure of the application say it could do, this never would have been allowed to become a public document. It would have just been classified and examined and just remained hidden. So there you have it. That's the claim. Anybody can, in theory, build this thing, and you too can see whether or not it achieves what the application said it's going to achieve. Okay, that's all I have to say on the things outside of the MUFON goings on. Let's get a little bit into the some of the stats here, just to show you how we're stacking up compared to prior years. 2,741 cases between January and the end of September this year. Of that, 732, 26.7% were unknown. That's within the realm of believability. Historically, unknowns have gone from, the Air Force had a really low number, 3% or 4%, but 10% to 30% is within the realm of what investigators over the years have found to be unknown. I've listed the cases, the states there, with the white number being the number of cases the state got. California always gets the most cases, and then the unknowns in the orange or the yellow would be 69, say, for California, 60 unknown cases for Florida. Yeah, Florida's pushing up the list there. And one of these days they're going to overtake California. NUFORC, what's that? That's the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington. It's an organization of one, Peter Davenport, a nice guy and a smart guy. You hear him a lot on Coast to Coast. His organization gets reports. In fact, he got 3,800 of them in that same period, more than MUFON. He doesn't do any investigations on these cases, so he might investigate 1 or 2 per year. So I don't know what the total of unknowns is, of course, in his bulk of cases. Nor, unfortunately, do I know how many of those, of Peter's cases, overlap with cases that MUFON has. Has anybody in here ever filed a MUFON CMS report on a case? Yeah, Mark? Did you happen to file with Newfork? Okay. Has anybody ever filed a case with a Newfork in this room here? Yeah, okay, did you also file it with MUFON? You don't know? Okay. There could be a total overlap of cases, or there could be a little bit of an overlap, but undoubtedly, because MUFON can't seem to work with Newfork, and maybe vice versa, we're probably missing some pretty good stuff here, pretty good cases. I didn't make another slide for the stats, but let me just briefly, give you just a few more here. The 2018 figures for the same time period last year was 3,165, so last year was a little higher than this year. What types of objects, what shapes of objects are being reported? What's the most plentiful one? A circle, a sphere. Together they encompass almost 1,000 of the sightings. Not unknowns, but just 1,000 of the reported cases. And discs at another 200. For some reason, both MUFON and Newfork have types of shapes, and they have circle, sphere, for example, and disc. Well, all those can be encompassed by one object. A sphere can look like a circle, and a disc can look like a circle if it's turned up such that it's the broad face is facing you. It could be a circle or conceivably a sphere. So there's some problems here. We have separate categories for cigar-shaped objects, 126, and cylindrical objects, 108. Tic-tac objects, that's a new category, okay? That comes from the Nimitz sighting of 2004. 22 reports described a tic-tac object, sort of a square thing with rounded corners. Let's not get into the tic-tac versus chiclet controversy. You know, that's something I'd rather not get into. But anyhow, ever since that report in the New York Times came out with the Nimitz and Fravor was the pilot, his sighting, people have described objects that were shaped as Tic Tacs. But I suspect that if you were to go back into all the tens of thousands of earlier cases from the 50s and all the way up to the present day, you would find many cases that are Tic Tac in shape. International sighting totals, that's another category that MUFON does investigate. We don't have a lot of investigators in foreign countries, but there's some. And a lot of the foreign cases are done by nationally based people here in the States. But how about those cases? Well, for that same January through September period, 951 reports came from countries other than the US. The United Kingdom, as you might suspect, was number one. 266 reports, 52 judged unknown. Canada second, 193. Australia third, 51 reports and 11 unknowns. The problem here with the international stuff is that Australia is a big country, and we only have 51 reports. For years, for 50, 60 years, they've had a pretty healthy UFO research community. The Australians, along with the British, the Canadians, the French, have very strong national UFO organizations. But we only get 51 reports from Australia. From France, we only got 32 for these first 9 months of this year. India, an enormous country, 1 billion plus people, I think, 26 reports. Yeah, it gets worse. China, how many, 1.5 billion or more? Five reports. None of them judged unknown. The Russian Federation, one sorry, miserable report, which was explained. One case from Russia. I have no reason to think that reports from Russia or China or Korea are any different from US cases, but nonetheless, it would be good to be getting these cases somehow. But there's language difficulties, there's government problems. China isn't exactly a paragon of freedom and liberty. So yeah, we're not, North Korea, yeah, forget that. Curiously enough, South Korea placed 4th on the international list with 35 reports. I thought, man, that is amazing. What's going on? I looked at those 35 cases on the MUFON system, and 31 of them were filed by one person who just keeps filing videos of strange things in the sky, not particularly good. And there were like 4 cases from other people from outside of this one guy. So they're really not what they seem to be. There you have it on the international score and on the figures here. Let me go into the cases now and talk about some interesting cases. I have about 35 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less, maybe 20. Why did I pick the cases that I have picked? Well, it's kind of subjective. It's based on sort of what I, Rob Switek, like, but the criteria I use are pretty good. I try to get cases that are amenable to a photograph or a witness drawing so that I actually have something to show you. Because I could show you just blank screens and describe each case if they didn't have drawings. That works for a while, but I don't think you'd want to hear 12 cases where I had absolutely nothing to show on the screen. So I do make an exception for that. Every case has to be unexplained. I'm not going to waste your time with IFOs, identified flying objects. And we all know that 26% were unknown, and the rest, the other 74 or something, were explained one way or another. I like cases that occur close by, because a case that occurs close by can be categorized as, you're probably less likely to confuse it than you are with a case that's a point of light many, many miles away in a night sky. That can be anything. I like when the object in the case does unusual things, makes a right angle turn, revolves in some kind of a weird way, makes a tremendous acceleration, has a weird shape. I'm not going to tell you again about an unknown case where it's just necessarily going across the sky in a straight line, unless there's good video associated with it, or a good photograph, or some kind of outstanding testimony. So those are a few of the things I use in pulling these cases. I do try to look through, you know, a number of thousands of cases. I can't read every one. Oh, let me go back to this thing. This was the first one, however. December 4th, 2018. And according to the United Kingdom, this is one of our international cases. A short sighting time. Again, longer sighting times are better than real short ones because in a longer period of time, the witness can identify the case if it can be identified. In 1 second, your brain might not encompass what's going on, so you maybe really could confuse an airplane as a true UFO. In this particular case, this man was coming to work very early in the morning, as was his wont, and he was, it was a little bit before 6 o'clock in the morning. He was walking up to his office building. He was maybe about 100 feet away from entering the door, when suddenly above him, he just noticed this yellow-black disc that you see there. He didn't know how it got there. He didn't see it arrive there. It just suddenly appeared above him. He stood looking at it. It was maybe, again, I'm hamstrung a little bit by the MUFON reporting parameters. It was from 10 to 30 feet in diameter. He checked that box. That's as small an increment as you can get. And maybe about 100 to 500 feet distant, but let's say it was 200, 300 feet away. He saw it very clearly above him. As he stood watching it, the light suddenly snapped off and the object vanished. A simple disc, but yet a good one. A case in Boothman, Pennsylvania early this year. This was the case of a woman coming from an optometrist appointment with her daughter. So her daughter's eyes were dilated. She was in a city area, as you can see here, sort of a kind of an urban area. The daughter has dilated eyes, probably wearing sunglasses or something like this, and suddenly the object you see there on the right, the white object appears in the sky, which was described as sort of a cylindrical, tubular object. And it was very, very bright. In fact, it was so bright that the daughter screamed because it was extraordinarily painful to the eyes, dilated as they were. You know, many of you probably know that same feeling, as I do, from walking outside with dilated eyes on a sunny day. It's a painful process. Immediately, that gray object that you see on the left there, which again was described as an oval object, came down from the sky. And the two objects literally had sort of a push-pull relationship. When the object on the right moved toward the object on the left, it moved back, just like two magnets repelling one another, back and forth. Then the object started moving up and down, again, sort of like a yo-yo, up and down in the sky, sort of in concert. Well, this thing was observed by a lot of people who were driving a car just like she was along the road. And one woman pulled off her car to the side of the road, watched these things, and she screamed. And she got back in her car, and she drove off down the road on the wrong side. I mean, it's sort of not funny. I mean, I don't know how that resolved. I assume no one was killed there, but other people were just watching outside their cars. So the whole thing was you know, well observed. But then the object suddenly, and I'm looking at my notes here to just refresh my mind, the object got within about a block of her. No sound was heard, and then they suddenly just departed by ascending straight upwardly into the sky. And she got this one photo here that I'm showing you. There it is, a cropped version of it, okay? And you see it a little bit better there. I don't know what those damn things are. It could have been a plane and a helicopter seen under unusual circumstances, but I'm taking the investigator's word for it that he or she considered all these various possibilities for this thing and put an unknown stamp on this thing. I mean, it doesn't look to me like a helicopter or an aircraft in either of those objects. Mark, this next one will be the video one. Okay. This occurred in Cape Coral, Florida, February of this year, as you can see up there. Had a sighting duration in this case of 35 seconds. I think the previous one had several minutes, so it had a nice long time. This was a man and a wife driving again along a road in Florida. Notice that gray object you see there rising up vertically from the horizon. It didn't initially appear by just coming horizontally into view here. And I think I have a video of this to show you. This is one still from the video that I captured. Oh. Hey, Sue? I'm not seeing the video thing marked, but it may be that I can't get the video on this thing here. Or maybe I just hit the... Yeah, I was looking for a big white arrow there, but I see the gray oblong UFO, but not the white arrow. You know, in the interest of time, I think I'll just move on. And maybe we can revisit that case. Sorry, Mark. Well, you know, I'll just move on because I don't want to. I do want to get to the end of my thing so you can see, you know, some of these others. Ventura, California, in March here. A fellow was out late in the night. By that I mean around 9:30 in the night in March. So it would have been dark. He was a security watchman or something like that, as I understand from reading the case. A security guard. It's a dark night with practically no clouds. Suddenly, this one cloud moves in from off the ocean over the land where Ventura is, and it's very low above the ground, 50 to 100 feet above the ground, such that the lower part of the cloud engulfs a 5-story building, the top of a 5-story building, as he's watching. He thought, well, this is kind of weird. There's no other clouds in the sky, and one rapidly moving cloud just comes over this building here. He's standing and looking west, so the cloud that you see in this picture here would be towards your west. Suddenly, an oval object appears on it would be the right-hand side of the cloud there. Down here, where it says start, moves across to the left, to the south. Then when it reaches almost the end of the cloud, and the object's flying against the cloud, it suddenly executes a U-turn, a flip, but a vertical flip. So the object completely turns upside down and then starts reversing its course in the opposite direction, back toward the north, at which point it then becomes two red objects stacked one atop the other, or he thought it looked like two stacked objects, one above the other. And that vanishes, and it's replaced by the original oval-shaped object again, which then flies a little bit more toward the north. But then he has what looks like a vertical line. That line is actually headed toward the east. It should be coming out of the screen sort of toward you. And the object traveled along that line. Each of these legs took about 15 seconds to complete. The object then came toward the east, did another U-turn flip, and then immediately dove back into the cloud. Instantaneously, he said, no, this was no 15-second course here. It just went right down back into the cloud, at which point the cloud then moved back out over the ocean, and the encounter was over. Is there anything I need to tell you about that case that I've missed? This was several blocks away from him, 3 blocks away, so it was a pretty close case. I don't know what this thing was. The oval was about the size of a quarter, held at arm's length. Bear in mind that the full moon is an aspirin tablet sized, an aspirin tablet at arm's length, so a quarter is pretty huge. Albany, Oregon, not Albany, New York, end of March. This fellow was relaxing in his hot tub in the night, 9:30. An early spring night, kind of hopefully nice out there then. He's watching a light fairly close to him maneuvering in the sky that crosses a electrical substation, goes across an electrical substation located quite close to him. He's watching it, and it's heading in a different direction from him. Suddenly, the object does what, all of us would not really want it to do. It suddenly comes right toward him. All he was conscious of was that it was a large body, a large dark body with a leading white light in front. All he could see was a light and the silhouette of a darker body. Couldn't tell the shape of that darker body. Before you knew it, the light was right over him, 30 to 50 feet high or so. And unknown to him was this square here that you see on the screen. This was inset, recessed up into the larger object, so that from a distance you couldn't see that lit rectangle with these three lights here, with the orange, the blue, and the green. And there was also what he described as a black circle here. God only knows what that was all about. The orange light seemed to be rotating about its axis, and it just hovered there right above him for a little while. Now, this was a pretty large rectangle here. My notes are showing that the rectangle was from left to right about 20 to 30 feet, so that each of those lights in there, the orange light and the blue light, were like 3 to 5 feet long. And the width of this was 10 to 15 feet. So this was not pinpoint depictions of lights in the sky. This was something right above him. As the thing moved away, continued on its path, he couldn't see any lights then. The leading light was facing away from him, and the recessed lights, of course, couldn't be seen. And he didn't hear any noise, but he thought, well, I did have the jets on the water tub, maybe that was obscuring the noise. But it just moved off. But it's again, a good typical example of a UFO case that appears close by a witness. If you think this is a helicopter or something and can prove it, if anybody can, let me know or MUFON know by all means, so that we can rectify our mistakes in the investigating corps. But this was dubbed an unknown. This was another international case, Cricklade, United Kingdom. It's had a 2.5-minute duration. This fellow was out walking his dog in a rural area by the Thames. What time was it? Yeah, 2:30. He was by himself and the dog. Suddenly sees this object that looks like an inverted spearhead. This fellow was very familiar with aircraft, and he described it as being like an inverted SR-71, with this being the tail of the SR-71 and this being the point or the nose of the SR-71. Big difference between a real SR-71 and this, however, was that this thing was pointing toward the ground, so it was the longitudinal axis was perpendicular to the ground, and it was moving as a whole toward the right there. He didn't hear the sounds of any motors. He couldn't see what was generating lift on this thing. When I looked at the weather details that are provided in the MUFON account, I see the wind was coming from the south and this object was heading toward the northwest. It's just vaguely possible that it was some kind of a floating device, and I'm speculating here, which I don't like to do, that maybe the wings of this so-called SR-71 thing somehow were canted and the wind was pushing it. But again, this was a large object, 30 to 100 feet in length. This was not a tiny 2 or 3 foot balloon. And it just moved out of sight. And there was another person there, he then discovered, as this object was going. 2:30 p.m., it wasn't even in the night, so if I misspoke on that, I apologize. It was an afternoon case. As the object was moving away, he noticed somebody else at some distance, and he got that person's attention and said, do you see this thing? Take a look at that. What is that? Real excited, and the person said, oh, I don't see anything. And the witness here, our witness, said, the object had gone behind a tree, but it was still clearly visible through the branches of the tree. All the leaves hadn't come on yet, but nonetheless, it remains a single witness case. But this object has a little bit of a similarity to the inset object I spoke about here in this very room some years ago that occurred southwest of Albany, New York. And I'm not going to get into a detailed description of this case, but in this Albany, New York case, this kind of an object was seen by 2 people in a sailplane, of all things, who were out flying. And this thing remained vertical and circled this aircraft and went off a long distance and came back. and then finally flew up into the sky and joined another object just like it at some distance above it, all the time oriented vertically as it flew through the air. There's absolutely nothing on that object to indicate lift. There was no sound, there was no exhaust, nothing was rotating. It was just what you see there, just as the guy by the Thames there. What provides the lift on that thing if it's not a lighter than air balloon of some type? And he never described, the guy from the Thames, of it having a tubular shape or any kind of an inflated shape. You know, let me know what your ideas are if you have any of them. Okay, I guess I got about 10 minutes left here. A case over of Hawaii, a nice place to be, Haleiwa on Oahu. Again, a crowded Hawaiian street. A woman's driving a car, sees this UFO, which looked like a series of triangles all arrayed horizontally. They had a common base. And she described detail on these objects as it seemed like they had rivets and seams, and some areas of them of the objects seemed to bulge out a little bit more than other areas. That's kind of hard to depict on the drawing here, but she did describe that. But she could clearly see seams on this thing as it was, you know, maneuvering through the air, light gray in color and about, in her words, the size of a large helicopter. That's still a fairly substantial object. What really struck the woman was that she seemed to be the only one that could see this thing, although it was in clear view on a crowded Hawaiian street, 11:30 in the afternoon. She saw a helicopter at some distance from this object, but she could see nothing connecting the helicopter physically or in any other way with this object, which then maneuvered out of sight, or she drove away. Very strange. In one case here, we have the woman with her daughter who encounters the two objects, and many people along the road see it, and in fact, it terrifies at least one person. In this case, nobody sees it except for this woman. But yet, I could probably pick 100 cases like that from the UFO files that describe that same kind of thing. Maybe 1,000, given enough time. Yeah, this is an interesting, very short case, unfortunately, just a few seconds. It occurred over Alabama. A fellow was incoming to, what's the name of it, Shuttlesworth International Airport. A fellow and his wife were on a, doesn't matter, CRJ 900 Bombardier jet. Anyhow, this fellow was a pilot himself, had 900 hours or something like that of flying experience. As he's coming in on their landing approach to Shuttlesworth, he sees this triangular object. He's sitting on the left-hand side of the aircraft. He suddenly sees this triangular object below him, and the aircraft's 4,000 feet above the ground at this point. Sees a triangular object emerge from the left-hand side of his aircraft that flew underneath the aircraft only 500 feet away. It was a triangle. Moreover, as the triangle was going through the air, it was rotating along its transverse axis, just rotating, like you might rotate a frisbee when you throw it. He was terrified. No aircraft should be this close to a commercial airliner coming in on its final approach to a major airport. His wife saw it, and it just flashed out of view. He had a 2 or 3 second sighting of this thing, but yet enough to pick up that it had a sort of a grayish silver color, and it was clearly no aircraft he could identify. And he seemed to be a pretty good witness in that respect. The plane landed about 8 to 10 minutes later, so that's the extent of this case. Very disturbing. This was a simple case in that it didn't do too much in the sky. I have one picture of this object here, and here it's blowing up a little bit. A mother and her daughter were going shopping in Nottingham, Maryland, this state. As they were going into the shopping center, this thing, a square thing, Paul, you'll be happy here, a rectangular thing here, you love it, was just hovering in the sky. They watched it for about 10 minutes. It never moved. And then she took this one photograph of it. I guess there's a second photograph. They're about equal. Then her daughter kept, Mom, I want to go shopping. Let's go shopping. Mom, we're going shopping. Let's go in the store. Let's go in the store. Okay. So they finally go in the store after 10 minutes of watching this object in the sky. And of course, it's the old story. Once they come out of the store, the thing's gone. But I don't know. I looked at that thing. It's kind of odd. And the investigator thought it was an unknown. But there's probably some more work that could be done with this thing. But it's kind of interesting. This was a Portland, Oregon case, the 22nd case. Oh, I'm sorry. I have Warrenton, Virginia, should be. Not too far from where we live. A witness outside for smoke at 11 o'clock in the night. It was like to go out every night at, in the evening, smoke a cigar outside, leaning against his truck. This was a habitual activity for him. He was very familiar with the lights of the aircraft coming into Dulles Airport, knew what he was looking at. Suddenly, this disc-shaped object with a dome on it literally flies instantaneously and stops about 10 feet in the air from him, and maybe about 10 feet in the air and 10 feet in front of him, very, very close. This is a fairly large object here. I think I have a size range on it for you. Well, I don't. Anyhow, yeah, it was a number of feet. A dome disc. He saw what seemed to be these hexagonal patterns on the underside of it. It had two lights which flashed alternately. The white one would come on, the blue one would go off, alternating back and forth. Then they would blink concurrently or simultaneously. Then they'd go back to the alternating pattern again. And he saw what seemed to be a lighter gray window in the top of this craft that seemed to be looking at him. And he got very uncomfortable. Here's this thing is hovering right in front of him like a giant bee or something like that. Would you like a giant hornet hovering right in front of you? He took a step back like that, and the object moved that much closer to him to take up the space. And he thought that eye was moving to keep track of him. As he watched it, it slowly maneuvered off over his house, hovered over his house for a few seconds, and shot off at terrific speed into the night sky on this one. When the object was right in front of him, it betrayed absolutely no motion. It didn't rock, it didn't, oscillate or anything like that. It was completely still. The investigator was very intense on trying to get a description of how this object actually behaved in front of him. It didn't move at all until it, accelerated out of view. A very odd case. Portland, Oregon. I knew that was coming up. This is one of the more interesting cases here. A woman who was asleep at night woke up to tend to her husband who wasn't feeling well, noticed the bright light shining in through the window. What is that? Went to the window, looked out. She saw what she described as this object going by, fairly large object, moving on a north to south course. But yeah, it looked like a horse chestnut. That was her description of it. A horse chestnut with like reddish spines protruding out equidistantly all over its entire surface, and it had a yellow glow. The yellow glow didn't seem to disturb the appearance of the spines. She could easily see them as she was looking at it. This had a size of a dime held at arm's length. Again, a pretty significant angular size. A case like this is very rare. I've heard of a case, and I looked through several hundred cases to try to come up with one from the 50s that someone described as looking like a World War II sea mine, a sphere with those little the detonator things coming out, or the triggers coming out on little stalks. Couldn't find it. But in my course of searching, I came across this from Brian Vike's blog. One of our earlier speakers talked about Brian a little bit, and he had a case up here by a woman that in 1971 was 6 years old. She was sitting on her porch eating some pecans in Griffin, Georgia, when suddenly this very large object here just sailed into view and went on past her. She was a little girl. She didn't know what it was, but she retained that memory of it. That thing is exactly the same thing as the earlier one that just occurred this year. in later life, she then went back and drew this drawing of the neighborhood to show where this object appeared in relationship to houses and stuff like that in her neighborhood. But I think that's as good as a correlation as you can get. And to me, a lot of it's great to have evidence in your hands, physical evidence of UFOs. That's what all scientists seek for, and we live for, and they die for maybe. But it's also good to have correlations of very, very unusual cases to show the persistence of a phenomenon through the years. That counts for something. If we only had one example of every case I've shown you, I'd be on more tenuous ground. But when I can point to 5 examples that look the same, occurring over decades, that speaks of veracity, at least in my opinion, on the part of the witness. Now a case that lies somewhere between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. Cue the Twilight Zone music, please. These are 2 drawings by two different witnesses. A man and a woman were on a beach around 12 o'clock at night. In Buxton, North Carolina, what was the beach? Cape Point. Cape Point was the actual beach, I guess. Walking along, kind of dark outside. Suddenly, it goes even darker than it was. Let's put it this way. They described the light as vanishing completely from the volume around them. They couldn't see anything. They could hear the ocean. They couldn't seem to get off the beach. They couldn't get off the beach. That's all I can say. That's I read the witness testimony. They walked up and down the beach. I mean, okay, if I were on the beach and the light suddenly went out, I'd maybe put the water at my back and walk straight. Possibly there was something there that impeded them from doing that, but anyhow, they seemed like they were very upset. So they wandered around this beach for several hours in complete, utter darkness. Apparently nobody else passed by. And they said, okay, we're just going to have to crutz it out here for the night on the sand and wake up in the morning. And just about the time they thought that this thing you see on the left here appeared, a ball of light. Actually, it was a dark sphere with an interior greenish light in the center of it, like a marble inside a baseball, or a clear baseball or something like that. Although the object was fairly big, several feet in diameter. It wasn't a tiny thing. Again, this appeared very close to them, 8 to 10 feet away. The woman was tremendously upset by this. They turned around, they looked at the object a little bit, and at that point it vanished. It went back out over the ocean. And almost before they knew it, it once again appeared in the exact same spot it had been before. Of course, they were very upset. They did think it was looking at them, and the man again moved a little bit, and the object sort of moved toward the woman, and once again took out over the ocean. And at this point, they started moving along the beach, and the object came back again for a 3rd time, and to the original spot, even though they were no longer near the original spot, and just sort of hovered there, and then just left. That was the end of this encounter. It only took the encounter took 5 minutes, but the ordeal took like 4 hours. So they just stayed there on the sand, and they woke up in the next morning and were on their way. The investigator of the case here was extremely impressed by the credulity and the sincerity of these people. They drew drawings that are largely similar. The object, on the last time they saw it, the outer ball seemed to glow with a more greenish color, and you could still see the original intense light in the middle of it. But that's how that case was. Okay, I have, wow, I really do. I'm just about out of time. Let me really quickly go through the one case I wanted to also tell you about that I prepared in conjunction with another a talk earlier this year. We're all familiar with the Papua New Guinea case. I think we all are. In 1959, by an Anglican priest and his flock, with this object that you see on the screen, this was drawn by Sue a number of years ago, hovered over the settlement of Father Gill, and beings could be seen on the rim of this thing over 2 consecutive nights. They waved back, and the people on the ground waved to them, and these beings on top waved back. The case is fascinating, and there's a lot more to it than I'm, in this short summary, can get to. But that's how that was. This has always sort of fascinated me. after I've read this case. It's like, how many more cases are there where the beings are standing on the outside of the object, on a platform or on a rim while it's in the air? I came up with one that a fellow from Virginia named Tim Goddard gave me a number of years ago. That was the only one I knew, where a man reported seeing a UFO back in like 1951, and the being was standing on a platform or something outside. Until I came across this very odd thing that this woman in Aldeburgh, England, saw in 1916 as a young woman of 32 or 33 years old. It was midday or so. She was bustling about the house, a bright sunny day. She opened a shutter in the house, again, middle of World War I, all right, looks out the window just to take in the landscape, and lo and behold, she sees this completely crazy thing 30 or 40 feet away from her window. A round platform with these very human-looking men standing on it, dressed in blue uniforms with bill-less caps. They just a cap without a bill or a peak. They were each tightly gripping the rail, just looking out. The object meandered around a little bit. It moved off away from her, again, 30 or 40 feet above the ground. It came to a kind of a taller building that she thought it was going to hit into, but it maneuvered around that or went up. And that was it. It just flew off, meandering into the distance. Nothing seemed to be connected to this object. Some of the usual things you might think of, well, the Germans were flying Zeppelins over England at that time. That's a fact. Did they cause a platform to be descended from the Zeppelin for reconnaissance purposes with these guys on it? Nothing was connecting it. Aviation experts have weighed in on this case. It subsequently appeared in a volume of the Flying Saucer Review. And people who knew about the German Zeppelins and how they operated said, yeah, they could lower a guy a few feet every once in a while to get below a piece of a cloud or something like that, but it would be suicide to lower a person hundreds of feet to where they were above the ground. That makes no sense. And in fact, he said they didn't do that. So here we have another case like the Papua New Guinea case. And this woman who saw this thing, it bothered her, her and her son wrote about it when he was in his 80s, for years afterwards. She never found out what it was. And indeed, I don't think we are going to find out what it was either, at least not today. And on that score, I will end my talk here. And thanks for your kind attention. And I apologize for going a little bit over time here. Thanks.